when he talked. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Tate, for visiting LSU, for your interest in this position, and for coming to participate in this panel. We are faculty from many different campuses, and sharing and moderating, not asking. I'm Gabriela Gonzalez from the EGO professor and professor of physics and astronomy, and I will be introducing each of the panelists in a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to your questions. I'm going to take my mask off while we do this, if that's okay.
Please, yes, people will hear, will understand us better.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Naveen Adusumilli, he's an associate professor at the LSU Agricultural Center. We have the first question.
Thank you, Gabby. Hello, Dr. Tate. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics with the Ag Center, which is one of the 9 institutions of the LSU A&M system. What a research faculty do is a lot of research work, crop demonstration plots, field agronomy in the fields of agriculture, forestry, aquaculture, natural resource conservation, across the more than 15 research stations that are spread out across the state. Then comes the bigger portion, or an equally important portion, I should say, of our extension specialists, the faculty and the agents, who take that research and provide outreach to our clientele, who are the professionals in each of those fields, farmers, foresters, so on. So what we would like to know is, through your leadership and with your incoming team, what are your short-term or through your short-term and long-term goals? How would you support the mission of Ag Center?
Well, foundationally, let's back up a second, because what you're doing is what a flagship system slash school should be doing. And let me tell you about my background. So I started my career when I was assistant associate professor. I was at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, where the Wisconsin idea was the permeating idea of the institution. And that idea is very simple. The University of Wisconsin should impact the lives of every single family in the state of Wisconsin. There is no greater way to impact day-to-day lives of every family in the state of Wisconsin than to deal with agriculture. I would argue agriculture, health, and education are the big 3 that you would want to be engaged with. So I don't know what your specific needs are. So now my question for you is, what do you need? Because I would need to understand that better. But in terms of actual support, I don't think there is a more foundational issue than agriculture in terms of life course and healthy human beings. And so for me, it's foundational, but I need to know more directly, what are the impediments, what are the opportunities that you have in order to better your programming, in order to be more impactful within the state of Louisiana for each family in the state of Louisiana. So now I've turned the questions to you. So
absolutely, and that's a wonderful point you made. So what we would like to hear from you again, I think, and a bit of clarification from our end is, our farmers, foresters, aquaculture folks, or food incubators, or startups, they reach out to us with questions, concerns, and ideas. So how would you and your team put us in that pivotal role and continue to make our clientele feel this is a system that we want to reach out with the questions, concerns, and answers?
So I'm gonna get into specifics because this is what presidents do. Do you need money? Are you talking to me about money? Are you talking to me about money, or are you talking to me about relationships? Because those are the two. It's either resources or relationships. There's the 2 commodities that we're managing, right? And so, do you have a resource problem, or do you have a relationship problem? Are there things the president can do to assist you in your relationship building or in your resource development process? Because in the end, after that, that's where the boundaries are, really, in many respects. When you're a leader, I can give you money, human capital, or I can help you with your relationships. I don't know enough to know, do you have a resource problem or relationship? Which one is it?
One, yes, there's always a need for more funds so that we can reach out to people and serve the questions in an effective way. So yes, there's always that funding problem, I would say, or a need for funds. But at the same time, I think it again goes back to what are we using those funds for, right? Are we hiring new, extra extension staff or extra research faculty to collaborate and coordinate activities? So, yeah, I think both. I don't know.
So I'm going to back you up one second.
Okay.
So my first question would be, what are your strategic aims? I'm going to ask you your strategic aims, and I'm going to ask you how are you determining whether or not you're meeting those aims. And then I'm going to come in and ask you if you're not meeting some of those and they're agreed upon aims as part of a strategy. I'm going to back up and say, how can we get you resources in order to meet those strategic aims? And if it's a relationship deal where I need to work with members who are appropriating money or in philanthropic activity, then we're going to work to make sure you have your resources. That's what I would do with every, not just ag, it'd be health and every other group, that you have to understand what the strategic aims are and how they fit together and what the resources are for them and what the relationships need to be in order for you to actually optimize giving you those resources. In every single engagement, that's how I operate. I'm going to ask you questions about your design. How are you organized to optimize what you want to get done? Is there a different organizational strategy? Because all we control are time, quality, and design. That's it. We do not control anything else. And design is nothing but time and quality factors put together. And so those are the kinds of things I would ask you as a collective, and then try to work to support you to achieve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move to Dr. Chris Kevil on Zoom. He's the Vice Chancellor for Research and Professor of Molecular and Cellular Physiology at the LSU Health Science Center.
Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, Dr. Tate.
Good to see you again.
Likewise. So following up on the previous question that was asked, one of the things I think we've all learned this year, this pandemic year, has revealed that scientific collaboration and the ability to be nimble are vital for both regional, state, and national efforts in rising to a common challenge. What is your vision regarding the role of science and technology across the LSU system to achieve and meet these goals with respect to really, quite honestly, any challenge that would befall us?
Let's start with health, because health more broadly is, I know you're interested in that, and that's a big part of your portfolio. The health alignment here, and I'm going to be candid, is not robust. And I think there's a great opportunity on low-hanging fruit to organize more broadly a strategy around health and human health, including the basic biomedical sciences, as well as more clinically oriented approaches and population science as well. So I see them all being mutually informing when you think about human development broadly defined, and organizing a synthetic theme in which people began to work together. Every article you read in a science magazine, science journal, we talked about this, I believe, last night, includes collaborators from around the world. You won't find an article in science anymore without 50 or more people who are collaborating from all over the world. And yet, it seems to be difficult for some reasons, and I think I alluded to it yesterday. You cannot allow geopolitical boundaries get in the way of doing outstanding science within the context of the system. So if collaborators can engage across the world, why can't we organize ourselves in an aligned fashion to take advantage in a nimble way, as you described, just like we've had to do with COVID? We were forced across systems, across the United States, to get our testing protocols going, make sure we understood the variants, and all the things that have been happening. We've done those because we were pressed to do them. Let's take that and now make it a normal way of operating within the system and build those synergies, tear down the geopolitical walls, and open up science so that it can manifest itself in greater fashion. To do that, there has to be a design. There has to be a way of organizing that takes advantage of the folks. And it's not just in health sciences. And as I said, one of the design features that needs to happen, because these things happen in tandem with corporations, is that the advancement group that deals with government relations, philanthropic issues, as well as economic development, has to have a line design, working with the health sciences folks, common messaging across these groups in real togetherness, building out the infrastructure and raising money on this side, back to your question, on advancement and working together in tandem for the research. Right now, most universities are not organized that way. Most corporations are. Point of fact, the most successful ones have anybody who's going in the public to get money, they're in one team, one set of messaging, and the people who create products in another group. And then those groups work in tandem on their communication. You bring money in and you create capacity at the same time. For example, with the health sciences and the research piece, and over here, you're bringing in money and they're working collaboratively together in order to advance the enterprise. Where you have multiple buckets of people operating in different places without the same messaging and without the advancement opportunity working together in a collaborative fashion. My aim would be to fix that. You have talented people, it's just not designed in order to max out. So that might mean territorialism would have to go away, but I think we can build trust and make it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we hear from Dr. Susan Marchand, a Boyd professor from the LSU Department of History.
So, Dr. Tate, very pleased to talk to you about a world that's quite different than the rest of my colleagues, managed social sciences, education, arts, music, and so on. We have many questions in that world, but one that comes to mind, given also your experience at Washington University, is about graduate students. They're so essential for our teaching mission and for advancing our research, and yet they're terribly underfunded. They live on poverty wages. This means they have to work extra jobs. They are then slow to finish, can't offer competitive scholarships. What's your advice for us, or what would be your recommendations as president for trying to elevate the position and the strength of our graduates?
So what we have going in American higher education is one of the most unethical schemes that one could design. We have people who are extremely talented, who want to get advanced degrees, anxious to be part of our system. We let them in at scale. We provide them minimal resources and don't even provide healthcare in some cases. And then we expect them to flourish as scholars. They are going into a depressed market in some places. It's literally unethical. I mean, honestly, I fought for the last, I was graduating for 6 years and now I've been provost last year, to make sure that there's a floor in terms of stipends. Can only go so low, otherwise don't admit the students, and you have to pay for their healthcare. And so at Washington University, I work directly with the graduate student senate and our faculty senate, or the folks who were the graduate advisors, to make sure that any student who was admitted to Washington University in the PhD program, that their health insurance was taken care of. We got that through, and we funded it. We also created a floor across the university. There was a low point, and it was in social work at that place was a low point. It was 19,000. But the rest of arts and sciences, including history, was at $29,000 for stipends.
Mercy.
And they had their health insurance paid for. And that was guaranteed for 5 years. Because our competitors, one of the things you have to do analytics, and I was big in analytics. The people we were losing to are Duke, Northwestern, et cetera. They already had those kind of benefits in place. If you want those students, that's what you have to do. So we created an analytics framework to benchmark who we were losing students to. And we had surveys, and they would tell us at the end where they went if they didn't come to us. And we presented that to our trustees and helped them to understand this is the game we're playing in. It's a global game, and we want to be elite at this, and so we have to have the resources. I've mirrored the same thing in South Carolina, which is much more similar phenotype in terms of institutional type to you. And the first thing that was transparent was we did not have a guaranteed health insurance. They were getting 10% paid. So I was really pleased. This week, we actually worked together with the deans, and we're in an RCM budget model, so everybody's in charge, right? And nobody's in charge. So the reality is it took a lot of work, but we've agreed that starting in the fall, that all PhD students and all TAs and RAs who are master's students no matter what program they're in, will receive full healthcare benefits. And the next part of the plank is we're going to have a conversation about what is the floor in terms of what we're going to give for stipends. We're going to try to benchmark and see who we're losing students to, and then try to create that floor. We had a great year financially, so this is the time to do it. And I'm committed to doing that. You know, and I told the president of our institution, whether or not, whatever happens to me in this search, stay the course, because if you do that, you're going to change the nature of this institution. You're going to get tremendous PhD students, tremendous master's students who are going to be part of the ecology. It helps the undergraduates. They have models to work from and people to engage with. It just changes the totality of enterprise. And so I think that has to happen, whether it's at the Baton Rouge campus or in Shreveport. I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot up there. You know, all of us have to be doing that at the same time, which then raises the health and reputation of the institution across the United States, as advisors are recommending people to come to your institution, because you actually have the benefit packages to go with great science and engineering and scholarship in the humanities. And so I think that's an important part of what has to happen, along with great professional development for people who might not want to be in the academy, but want to get a PhD, and we give them an opportunity to flourish in that way. I think all of those things have to happen.
Thank you. I'm sure if there are other students.
It can be done. They said it couldn't, they told me that it could not be done in South Carolina. They said it could not be done. And we did it in less than 9 months. So these things can be done. If you're committed to it, you have great deans, and you're communicating, it can be done.
Thank you. We'll next hear from another panelist on Zoom, Dr. Patricia Molina. She's a professor of physiology and director of the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Center of Excellence at LSU Health Science Center.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Dr. Tate. As president of LSU, you would oversee the academic, the athletic, and financial aspects of the university. And I believe you would agree that it is the research enterprise that drives the reputation of an academic institution. Having served as Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs and Provost at USC, what have been your most important achievements in growing the research enterprise during that time? And how will your learned experiences inform your vision for maximizing LSU's research infrastructure and supporting the growth of research?
You might, if you don't mind, I'd like to expand that from just South Carolina, but I'll give you some South Carolina examples. You just want 1, 2, 3, 4. I got many.
I want you to give me your 3 top accomplishments, and I want you to tell me how what you've learned in those experiences is going to make you the best president LSU can ever hope for in terms of research enterprise.
So let's start. I'll start with one in South Carolina, and then I go backwards. So the most important thing I learned is that research and economic development go hand in hand. And so you have to have a partner who works in economic development, who also has a government relations expertise. And so I partner with my colleague there in government, who's expert at government relations, but is economic development person. And what we do is we go out and understand what our academic folks are doing in terms of their research, really understand it deeply, and simultaneously try to understand what corporations in the federal and state government are willing to give us appropriations for discretionary money. And those things happen simultaneously. So you're working and scrambling to figure it out. So perfect example, we're in the middle of COVID. Pandemic is happening. Obviously now human health is becoming an extremely important conversation. So we go and talk to HHS, which is our Health and Human Services group, and talk about the fact that we have an outstanding public health school. How can we link the public health school to our healthcare provider in our medical school, which is Prisma Health for us? They have a need for clinical investigation, great data, no researchers, okay? And so data's not even clean. It might as well be in their back pocket. We got these great epidemiologists and public, really population science folks who can do that kind of work. You need money to get it started. You can't go to NIH with the speculative kind of, we're going to get at the data. And so HHS gave us $8 million. We're now working in combination with our colleagues in public health and our Greenville Medical School and Prisma Health to look at the data that Prisma has, and they have about 50 or 60% of all the patients in the state in our state, a great majority of them in certain areas. And that money now is being used to incubate, to clean data and get data ready so that we can actually impact human health in the state of South Carolina. What did I learn? You have got to work in tandem with the researchers, with government and private entities. We'll bring IBM in to help us with AI. We'll bring our AI Institute in to help with the data. And that's how you begin to work out the collaborations. So there are unique opportunities in the political economy to advance the research enterprise. And it requires a coordinated effort in the appropriate design. What I'm telling you is a design that exists that we're building in South Carolina. It's a design that could be built here too. I don't see any reason. Other examples I have include academic programs and building the research infrastructure on the human capital side. So the way I think about the world, it's a rank sensitive environment to get top students, especially in a global competition. If you're attempting to get students from an international perspective, they are rank sensitive. They look at the rankings. They can see if you published in great places, but they still look at rankings. And so what I do and what I've done in the past is I try to configure divisions within our schools. By a division, I mean actually a group, and say, can we begin to admit students into a division? So let me give you, for example. At Washington University, our social work school is ranked #2 in the United States. Political methodology is ranked 15. In psychological sciences is in the top 10 or 15. Our computer science program was top 40. They were outside of the top 10 or 15. If we think about it, almost those other areas deeply need computing in different ways. If we combine them, we have now 3 highly ranked programs with a program that has the technical expertise that's needed to inform those others. You create a division, you admit doctoral students into that division, they take common courses in that first year, and then they decide where they want to get their PhDs. I funneled the money into the division to pay for the students along with engineering dean who wants to actually advance his computer science program. Now they're getting students that they never would have gotten before because you've touched them with the rank programs and the technical expertise is there. They went out immediately and got research dollars from private industry as well as competitive money from NSF. That's what so I think about how do you bring together people who have complementary, I would say, attributes that allow you to be more competitive in the marketplace to bring better students and to actually compete for grants. And so I've done that at scale at all places that I've gone. So public-private partnerships is what I work on, and internally, using and taking advantage of complementary attributes. And finally, I'm going to just tell you the one I'm most proud of, because this is the hardest one. So when I arrived in South Carolina, each dean was responsible for the research labs that they had. Now, COVID hits, and we have a chance to go to the state to get money to build a lab, to do the kind of testing we need, and ultimately research that's going to be related to it. But one dean controls this lab, another dean controls that lab, and they don't want to work together. So basically I said, finally, this is how we're going to do this. Nobody controls space anymore. Now the space is controlled by me. And what we're going to do is the people who are funded or have great ideas are going to have access to the space. And if you don't, you won't. And guess what's going to happen long-term in that environment? We're going to optimize funding, and we're going to be able to take our money, because now I can go to my trustees and say, I need to reallocate money to maximize this space and make it better and outfit it, because I know there's going to be a funded investigator there. They're going to be somewhere from campus, and it's not done in a way that is controlled by one person, but rather in a collective fashion in which we're trying to optimize our external funding and be the most competitive we can be in South Carolina. Now, that happened for COVID. Don't think I overrode faculty governance, because we did create a committee and task force in order to come up with those kind of ideas for us to be able to do that, as well as thinking about space in a very different way, which is that it can be used in ways that people were sharing space and just maximizing what we have, because we're bounded by our physical space. And institutions that actually increase their research funding, they generally are buying more property to get more land to add more research labs. But let's say you can't do that. The only other way is to go in and look at and see who's productive and who's not, and begin to allocate based upon productivity. I'm big into allocating based upon productivity, because we have a lot of dead space. Let me tell you, I went around our campus, and I know this is being broadcast. I took pictures of laboratories people told me they were doing research in. And the things that I saw were not equivalent to what you would expect to see in a 5th or 6th grade lab. Those spaces were reallocated to people who were actually more productive. If you ask me the thing I'm most proud of, because that took the most courage, all these others are just me going around and being good at talking to people. This one required me to tell people they weren't being productive. And I'm going to actually make sure that it is allocated to people who are. And so that's who I am. I don't hesitate to do that. And I promise you, I would do it here. I promise you. So don't pick me if you don't want that, because I promise you that's what's going to happen. If your lab is productive, you have nothing to be fearful of. But if your lab is not productive, then, and there's somebody waiting in the wings who actually can be, then it should be allocated to the individual who has the idea. You can be doing something else to add value to the institution, but we don't want to pretend like we're doing research when we're not. You have to be doing research, adding value, and making a difference. And that's what optimizes the university. It's not personal.
Thank you. We'll change gears a bit. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Nancy Kevil. She's at the LSE School of Coast and Environment, and recently the National Science.
I saw that. Congratulations. That's awesome.
As you know, I'm with the College of Coastal Environment, and Louisiana is a great state, but it has many environments. Mississippi River being polluted, minority populations being most affected by that pollution. The coast is falling apart. The communities that want to do research to support coastal restoration are falling apart, or they don't work together, is the main issue. And we need to have some sort of a different attitude towards sharing and collaborating and making sure that sound science information forms restoration efforts. And I'll have a follow-on to this, but how can LSU, and this is LSU today, under LSU's leadership, how can we make this a much more productive, collaborative effort?
So let me start by saying this is not even a Louisiana issue.
Oh, no, I was in South Carolina.
This South Carolina, and you are foundational to protecting the United States of America. What you described, it's not simply a state. I mean, all you need is a map, and you understand it. And so I think first and foremost, this has to be organized and calibrated from a communication perspective, that we're in the business of trying to protect the United States of America, as well as Louisiana. And there needs to be a communication framework that's put out that really begins to socialize why we have to do certain things. The socialization is not merely for the external bodies who provide appropriation, it's also internally to signal that this is extremely important. And I think that there's no way there could be a strategic plan with this institution where that is not a foundational part. It relates directly to human health as well. If you're not protecting yourself from this and working to actually bring that restoration about, It doesn't matter from a biomedical point of view if I'm keeping you alive and healthy, if the actual geospatial territory in which you need to reside is eroding. And so these go hand in hand in terms of, in my opinion, back to agriculture as well, of foundational issues that a flagship should be engaged in, especially one geopolitically, geography-wise positioned here on a coast. You just can't ignore that. And it's also a sea grant institution. So this is a foundational part of what should be happening. I personally would want to take that charge on. I'm not a oceanographer or anything, but I am a big geospatial guy. And I really pay attention to where we are and how we're located in geospatial terms. I think this is an important part of what should be happening. I also think it's an area in which there can be significant federal support for it, if organized appropriately. Not sure if the state will support it because there are some regulatory functions that some in the state might view as being problematic. However, I do think that the federal government would understand, especially over the next few years, as all the different climate change issues are happening. Like, I think got to work hand in hand with the federal government to make sure that we protect the boundaries of this country.
Right. Many of the issues are long-term issues because of climate change, other global changes on transportation. How would you think further than, well, everybody has a 20,000. Climate is changing. It's going to be here. It's going to take much longer look at this. How do you sit with that? Is that possible? From one president to the next, or one Senate committee to the next, or one federal agency to the next?
As one who has critiqued NSF on a regular basis, I worry about that. But let me say this, in the here and now, we have an opportunity. The first thing is it's got to be strategically embedded in the institutions, system-wide. And secondly, we've got to work with the state legislature. It's a socialization issue. You're socializing this. And the investment in science is always a long-term investment. And so the extent to which we improve the science and invest in the science here on this front is our commitment as a flagship that we're not walking away from this. So we've got to hire people, and we've got to make sure that the science is outstanding and consistent. And that's what we can do. And again, the communication arm of that, so the findings are happening, but how are we communicating those to people so that they understand how to operate? How are we working with policymakers to help them understand? I think that's a big part of what needs to happen. And I can imagine having literally summits of that sort here based upon the science that's happening here at LSU and colleagues from across the country and really the world, informing the people here about that. I think that's something that really we need to be an important part of what happens, because a lot of times, where are people learning about this? Twitter, Facebook? I mean, that's dangerous and reckless. I mean, you would want to have it so that this information is being informed. And I would go one step further. The big part of the reason science is rarely translated is rarely understood is because it's not translated in a language that can be consumed and then acted upon for policymakers. And so I would suggest even that the flagship should be engaged, because ag has been doing it for years, an important communication function around exactly what you're describing and translating that so it can be consumed by broader publics who act on the information. And that's the kind of commitment I would want to bring to it. I would need to bring people like you in with people who actually think about political communication and have them operating in tandem. But that's the problem solving that flagship universities, is flagship institutions, broadly systems.
Thank you. Next, we go back to Zoom. We hear a question from Dr. Eric Rabusi. He's a Boyd professor in diabetes and metabolism at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center.
Good afternoon, Dr. Tate. As you can hear, I'm not from this country. I came to this country as a visiting scientist at NIH intramural. I said 2 years maximum. I stayed 15 years. Then I went to the corporate world in the pharmaceutical world. And then, I decided I didn't want to finish my days. And I was attracted by the Pennington Biomedical Research Center because it was the mecca for obesity research. And as an epidemiologist, you know that obesity is one of the major trigger of all these chronic disease of aging, diabetes, cancers, et cetera, and to our public health system. Now, just briefly, Pennington is 60 faculty, 25 to 30 postdocs, 65 million of budget, most of it from contract and grants. We have no tuition, and about 20 million from the state. And I have two questions. The first is a general question. For me, I didn't come here because of the football team. I came here because of the Pennington. And for Louisiana now to transition to a knowledge-based economy, it seems to me that positioning LSU as a true level, because I don't think it's a true level 1 research university, will be paramount. And after reading your CV, I'm sure you agree with me. Now, my question is, will be that a specific goal for your administration? How will you implement this? And for example, would you hire someone who is going to be in charge of growing knowledge-based research at LSU? That's my first question.
Well, by definition, LSU is a research one university. By definition. Now, within the category of research one universities, of course, there is gradations. There are levels within that. We may agree that LSU may not be at the top of that, which would be the AA universities, the top 60 plus in the United States. So we could agree on that, because by definition, you're not, because you're not in it. So we don't even have to have a quick, this is not even debatable. Okay, so that's where we agree. Now, at its core, in every conversation, and I will say it over and over again, is the issue of design. How do you design to take advantage of the different research pieces in this system so that as a whole, it's operating in a way that makes it more competitive and optimizes? And I think, in my opinion, that there needs to be a design that includes, and I'll keep saying it, you've got to have someone who's fundamentally responsible for health sciences, broadly defined, including some of the work that's happening with you. And that person is literally just driving the research efforts to be synthetic, taking advantage of complementary kinds of things. We're not complementary internal, finding partners, business, and other academics to really engage it. That has to be fully embraced. Simultaneously, the advancement group or an advancement group has to be put together that includes economic development, the development team that deals with philanthropic gifts, as well as government relations. Those groups have to work hand in glove to help drive the knowledge-based notions that you described. It's not purely about Pennington or Shreveport or New Orleans or this campus. It's about the synthesis of them all and putting that together and having common communications and driving it to move it to what you're describing to be at the top. So if we aspire to be AAU, what does that look like? Well, it looks like what I just described. And that's what people organize, and that's how you design yourself in order to attain those goals. And I think that's something that can be done. There are very talented people here. Ultimately, it will depend on the design. And I do believe, sir, moving beyond geopolitical interests. That is hugely important for this to work. And so that requires trust, and you've got to build and trust the process. But my hope is that you found somebody who might be able to build that kind of trust and who understands design and you're talking to. But we'll see. But I think the answer to your question is is about how we organize and design. Because you're going to keep getting your external dollars, and folks in chemistry and physics, you'll get your dollars, and Ag Center will get their dollars. And, you know, in the end, it all looks great. But what does it mean if you try to organize that in a synthetic way to move the institution broadly defined forward? That's what has to happen. That's the energy that has to be brought to bear. Those are the opportunities that are lost in terms of dollars and people. And I think that's where LSU can be a difference maker. It's before you. All the pieces are here. It's just a matter of whether it can be all put together.
Yep, thank you. And my second question is more related to biomedical research. As you know, we are living in the deep south and there is health disparities. We have seen that with COVID. And I think that, you know, universities in the south have really to play an important role when it comes to health disparities. However, our faculty in general is not as as well representing the health disparity, the underrepresented minorities. And I think that it is important to attract to, let's say, LSU, the best talent from underrepresented minorities. How do you do that, and how would you help us to recruit these people? Because sometimes it's not so easy to recruit in Louisiana in general.
I'm going to ask that gentleman to take it over.
That was Isaiah's.
Yeah, that's my question. You just stole my question.
So, no, well, let's talk about it, and you know, because it's an interesting a question. Without so tabula rasa, I only know what I see on the website, and I don't know fidelity of those. So, but the way I think about the world is, and what we're doing in South Carolina is generally people will say the pipeline is broken, it's not working, and then they throw their hands up and they give up. They might not say that in history. They do? Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, I know they say it in STEM fields. You're breaking my heart for saying it in history. But the point of fact is that you've got to figure out a way to build your own. And because otherwise it will be a continuous excuse. And so what we decided to do is we're partnering with HBCUs in South Carolina, 3-2 and 4-1 programs. And the idea is to get those students on our campus who historically wouldn't have been, and give them an opportunity to get at least a master's degree while matriculating at their other institution. Same time, we're creating on-ramping programs that are like post-bac programs, so that if we have undergraduates at our institution in South Carolina, because we're like top 3 or 4 producer of African-American students, for example, in the United States, undergraduate degrees, we're the #1 producer of African-American students in the state of South Carolina. We have talent on our campus and they're leaving. So how do we keep them? Maybe they're missing a course here or there, or they need GRE prep. Let's put them in a scaffolding situation in a post-bac. We expanded our program that prepares African-American students, for example, for the professorate. And we included master's students who are going to be funded in that too. And now we're at the PhD. So let's see what we've just done here. We can bring you in as an undergrad. We can bring you in as a post-bac. We can now bring you in as a master's student, or we can bring you in as a PhD student. And on top of that, my office has a postdoctoral program we're establishing. It really mirrors Michigan's program, where we're going to bring in postdocs in STEM fields and the humanities, as long as they're working on something that's related to a scientific area, so like the medical humanities and others. That's just where we're starting. In any social science field, so if a sociologist is working on health disparities, we're bringing them into the postdoc program. You can just touch something dealing with STEM or health, you're eligible. So that means even in the communications PhDs are eligible if they do health communications. And we're bringing them all in, and we want to have cohorts of people who come in into these postdocs with the idea that they will be there for 2 years, and the faculty unit has to commit to look at them as a potential faculty hire. And that's part of the deal. And we pay half out of my office, and the school has to pay the other half for the postdoc. And that way they have some skin in the game, and they have to get a chance to see people where they can stop saying that they don't exist. Meanwhile, if you really think of what we have now built a platform that allows you to enter at any given point of the developmental process in schooling. You can enter in as an undergrad, you can enter in as a postbac, you can enter in as a master's, you can enter in as a PhD student, or you can enter in as a postdoc. And we've got it covered. That's our pipeline. And we're going to make sure that it's robustly funded. Our strategic planning money is funded every single level of this, along with leveraging in the RCM, the dean's money for to have skin in the game. And that's the kind of thing you have to do if you want to take off the table that we have a pipeline problem. Because otherwise you're waiting on somebody else's pipeline to solve your problem. And that's not how it works, because the faculty are going to say, we just can't fix it. Why not fix it yourself? And if you do that, you've got a shot. That's what we're doing. I mean, I would be happy to do it here under certain conditions. You all team up and work with me.
Thank you.
Well, next we'll hear from Dr. Isaiah Warner, Boyd Professor at the LSU of Chemistry, and a great contributor to the pipeline you're talking about. You can brag about that.
He needs no introduction to me.
Well, you said a lot of interesting things, and I'm very interested. You know, as a Boyd professor and someone about to retire, I started reassessing my own degree. And more than half of my PhD students, 67, 68, have been women, and more than a third have been underrepresented minorities. In addition, I've generated hundreds, maybe thousands of undergraduates got to STEM PhDs. One of the things that you mentioned, though, in terms of solving the solution, I have a somewhat of a disagreement with. And you're suggesting that you can take PhDs who come and work with you and then introduce them into the faculty position. And many universities will not buy into that because that's essentially inbreeding. So diversity in all areas, in my opinion, is the best for science, best any area of research. And if you are bringing in your postdocs as faculty members, you are inbreeding and therefore not diversifying the research interests. Research interests is the best way, in my opinion, to go. And so I don't particularly like that idea. I don't know if you can justify.
Yeah, I can justify it.
How you can get diversity by bringing in postdocs or working with the faculty and then become faculty members.
Okay, let's talk about that. First of all, Harvard never had a problem doing it, but that's aside. WashU doesn't have a problem doing it. So here's what ends up happening. You end up saying, and this is implicit because I dealt with this as a graduate dean. You're telling me you train someone, but they're not good enough to come work with you. That's what you're telling me. And if you're telling me that, then what's wrong with your program? But I'm going to take it to a different space. So imagine you're a chemist and you work with me in arts and sciences. Your postdoc can be in the School of Medicine. It doesn't have to be in the chemistry department. Your postdoc can be in it could be in agriculture, it could be in nursing school, because you don't necessarily have to stay in the same place with postdoc. We get that inbreeding part of it, using plant language, is problematic. But you can, the point I'm trying to make and what we're trying to build is from a developmental perspective, let's not make excuses. Sir, the excuses are mind-numbing. I have seen it over and over again, and so have you. So all I'm saying is that we're designing a pathway internally that you get a PhD in chemistry and go work in our pharmacy or postdoc. You're in a different lab, it's a different world, and then we could hire you back in biology, depending on what you do. There's a lot of different ways that could work, and that's the kind of thing we're working through. So I agree with you that you don't want to have the inbreeding, but I also go back to something that I just saw over and over again. And I'm going to tell you, I just will not tolerate it, that you have an elite person who goes out and goes somewhere else, and then you tell me you can't find anybody, but you had that person and you don't even try to bring them back. That's the kind of stuff that I'm really alluding to. And it's really problematic for me. I'm passionate about that, but I think there are ways to work through the design that allow you to actually, this is a big enterprise. This is massive. So I'm here working with you. I get a PhD in agriculture economics, let's say. And then I go do a postdoc in the econ department. And then I go to Shreveport and work. That works. It stays in the system. I mean, that's all I'm trying to say, that we can create that kind of experience internally. In South Carolina, it's just like this system. We have multiple campuses, different ways of engaging in that way. So I think it can work without your inbreeding problem.
That's an interesting concept. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that is interesting. The other thing about it is that we have a grant right now where we are essentially growing students that will go on and get PhDs. We are undergraduates, get PhDs elsewhere, and then we follow them and try to get them back. So that's less of an inbreeding problem. But what you propose is also interesting. The other thing I have is you brought up something else that I thought was interesting, is that you are going into laboratories and making decisions that are who's productive, who's not productive. Are you making those decisions along? Who's making those?
I did end with the caveat that the faculty and leadership governance were involved with that. So in a specific case around the COVID one, I sat down with the two deans who were involved with the space, as well as the investigators who were involved, and we took an inventory of what was really happening, as well as the grant funding or lack thereof. And we were able to make a decision to make it work. We also made the individual investigator whole who lost the lab, really accommodating them in a way that was more aligned with the kind of funding they had.
And what about young people that are on their way up? How do you judge who's going to be successful?
Those people have to be invested in at scale, and it's just, that's a tenure promotion, that's an up and out decision, but they should be given every opportunity to be successful while they're in a probationary period. People I'm talking about were senior individuals whose careers had really began to slow.
Thank you. Well, we only have time for a couple of follow-up questions. Maybe I start with that.
Great. I'd like to ask you sort of a big communication question. When you're speaking to parents or students or to state legislature, how do you answer the question, what is college? What do you tell them? What is it? What is it for? What is it?
I don't answer the same way with each group.
So can you go through some of your
So if I'm talking, all right, if I'm talking to a supermajority Republican group in the state of South Carolina, we're going to talk about the economy and the workforce, and we're going to talk about how we're adding value. And I'm going to say that it doesn't matter what they major in, these folks are going to be creative. The technical folks are obviously going to add value in ways that you can see in clear terms. Our humanist colleagues are going to add value because that's the creative class. They understand that language. Those folks add value in different ways than an engineer or a scientist would, but they're clearly going to add value to our workforce because they invest in workforce development period. And they're not interested in our liberal arts discussions about those things. As a matter of fact, about it, talk to them that way, you're not going to get appropriations. If you're talking to the Democratic side, depending on their background, they tend, I don't want to be stereotypical, but they tend to want to talk about citizenship, people being very strong and able to add value in terms of governing the country. I think that also works with Republicans as well, and that's usually a secondary argument that I make with them, and both work pretty well. They all want the same thing, but your discourse pattern has to change. Parents right now want to know, are my kids going to get a job? Are they going to, are they going to be able to work when they get done? And so I try to make a case, whether you're in the liberal arts, outside of STEM areas, whether in STEM areas, that they will ultimately find their way, and the data is very clear about it. It will be a different path for each, but ultimately our liberal arts students end up out-earning the students who earn STEM degrees over time. It's largely, they don't have to have the technical expertise. They're growing and learning all along. And so it's extremely important for parents to understand that the history majors and English majors actually do make a living, and over time really do pretty well. So I just try to speak to them directly where they are right now. The debt situation has got a lot of parents really spooked. And so you have to be very careful what you say and why. But you want them to encourage the young people. At WashU, 80% of our students came in wanting to be doctors. And that didn't happen. There's something called organic chemistry. And so they didn't make it, and they decided they had other interests. And what we try to explain to them is okay if they switch up and major in political science or economics, they're gonna have a great career and they're gonna add value in a different way. And they can still get a doctorate if they want in those areas, but they're not gonna be an MD. But you have to work with the parents and talk to them about it. The value proposition for higher education is still extremely high. I think it's extremely high in the American South, where the demographics are growing. We have unique opportunities here to add value to the knowledge economy, as my colleague was talking about. And we need history majors. I invested in humanities at WashU, for example, with social entrepreneur-like careers for those humanists who were in PhD programs. And we built in live-learn environments for them to deal with a group called Tech Artista, which was really taking social issues and getting our humanities students ready to run businesses related to those. So there are just a lot of ways to talk about this, and really, I think the discourse pattern has to change. And you're not being a hypocrite, you're talking to your audience and helping them understand the value proposition. And that's extremely important. Now that they've seen this, though, it's not going to work down here. Done. Absolutely cooked. But anyway, that's just the way it works.
Thank you. You want to do follow-up?
Yes, I have one, and you've been mentioning some of Proudest achievements. So what I would like to hear is one of your most proudest achievements in terms of outreach in delivering the missions of land grant and sea grant university.
And space grant.
And space grant, yes.
So the project that I worked on that gave me the greatest satisfaction in terms of outreach to the community and adding value like a land grant was actually at a private institution. And at Washington University, I was a part of a group called For Sake of All Project, where it was a group of us who we were studying African-American health in the St. Louis region. And what were the factors influencing African-American health? And I was the senior most person, but I wasn't the PI on the grant, I was just the old guy. And they were all assistant professors at the time in biostatistics, in public health, psychology, and various areas, health behaviors. And at the time, we organized ourselves, and back to communicating, we each synthesized an area of our research and then wrote briefs that were written at the 8th grade level so that everybody could read them. And then we had undergirding them for our scientific friends, all the psychometrics and all the statistical ideas that were associated with technical papers. And then we created all kinds of vignettes to communicate to the public. We created like individuals who looked like our research and walked the community through almost like in a simulation of what it would be like if you were born in St. Louis and you didn't have insurance and you didn't have the right education and the healthcare system began to fall apart. What would happen if you methodically walked through that person's life? And then we showed them what was happening at scale in St. Louis, and ultimately presented that to the community it was at the History Museum. It's a really powerful moment. We brought in leaders from around the country to talk about it, and those folks, the thing I'm most excited about, every one of them, because they were worried about public engagement, all went on to become tenured faculty members, either at Washington University, one's at NYU, we lost her, but they all, because the big question is, if you engage that way, will you make it? And we worked on making sure that they made it, and then we published what we did in the scholarly outlets so others who might be interested in doing that kind of work would do it. For me, that was the most gratifying moment as the old guy and the team to watch them flourish and actually give back to the community in the ways that they all wanted to, but were afraid to do because they thought they would continue. And they did it, and they were very successful. Subsequently, all of them are funded investigators.
Is Mark Wrighton still president at WashU? Or?
Mark Wrighton is no longer president. He retired a couple years ago. When he retired, I left. because Mark Ryden to me was absolutely one of the,
Brilliant young man.
really one of the, he's a chemist like yourself, and really one of the finest academic leaders I ever worked with in my life. Really modeled on what it meant, what does it mean to be a leader of an academic institution and do it with integrity, to do it in such a way that you aspire to be the very best research entity you could be. And that's
And what's the background of the person that replaced? He had a different role.
well, we'll have to talk offline about that.
And we have to talk a bit louder too.
Right.
He's a good guy. He and I work together, and I have a lot of respect. They're very different, and I respect him. He's, you know, for me, it was just great work for someone like Mark, right? MIT experience. It taught me.
Well, we have a few minutes left. But I wanted to ask you.
I was gonna say, Gabby, do you have a question?
Actually, in your previous, you mentioned the LSU strategic plan. And I was thinking, what you think, how do you think an LSU strategic plan for the future should be drafted, and how research and science and scholarship?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to do strategic planning processes. You can have focus groups. You can bring in, you know, the stakeholders and talk through what the values are. We really were actually doing that right now. I mean, you know, the environment came up as one issue, agriculture, what is college for? All those things are real questions you ask in strategic planning. How are you going to deal with diversity? We had reasonable agreement. I clarified, but you pushed back. We need that. I mean, that's what needs to happen in the strategic planning function. To me, what is critical is the level of the plan. And so my critique of the current documents was that the one that was beautiful in purple and old gold, I couldn't tell whether or not that document was for the Baton Rouge campus or the system. And then there was a second document that looked like, you know, it was in black and white. It talked about it was system goals. And then it didn't have the demarcations that I really could understand. So I asked the group, which one do you want? So I think there actually needs to be a planning function that looks at the system and talks about what the system wants to get done, including how you want to communicate. And then there need to be planning functions that look at the individual campuses in light of what the system is trying to accomplish, and have an aligned set of goals so that everyone is marching in the same direction in complementary fashion. And that to me is going to be the big heavy lift over the next 3 to 5. That document says it expires in 2025. And I guess you're raising money based upon the capital campaign for that document. So I don't want to talk out of turn. I'd have to understand what's going on with the capital campaign, because usually you line up the silent phase of the capital campaign with a planning phase like this. And you're going out and talking to your constituents, both on campus and off, and finding out what people are going to give money to, and you're shaping that document so that you can make sure, remember I talked about that advancement group that you would have in your design, they're making sure that whatever you put in that strategic planning document, they can raise money from government entities and private entities. And all of that is aligned, and then that's how you just propel the totality of your system. That happens in a quiet phase. Then a public document comes out because you work together and everybody's on the same page. In the open phase of the capital campaign, you're striving to achieve those goals, but you're then trying to finish the campaign up. And that's how you move forward. That's the Mark Ryden strategy, by the way. And that's the game for this. And right now, it may be out of sync. Not that it's bad, I just don't know where you are. And so those are some questions I have for the trustees, the supervisors. Where are you on all of this? And are you planning something in the future? Because campaigns end, but they never stop. Once you hit your goal, you go into the quiet phase. And so that's what we have to figure out, when we're going to start looking at the strategic planning effort to line up with what will be probably a public phase after you're halfway done with raising the money you claim you want to make. Because you never announce until you're halfway done. I'm giving away all the trade secrets here, but that's how it works.
Thank you. Do our panelists on Zoom have a follow-up question?
Yes, I would like to ask a follow-up question. So I've heard quite a bit about your initiatives to improve life for postdocs, for graduate students, to build a potentially more successful pipeline for recruitment and retainment of people from underrepresented groups. But I would actually like to bring you back and ask you to comment either on how impactful that redistribution of lab space that you feel so proud that you led, how that impacted on research productivity, and whether there are any other examples that speak to your ability of growing the research infrastructure at your previous institutions.
I have no idea how impactful it's going to be because we just did it last semester. So I do know that we received $8 million for COVID research and have potential to get more because what we developed and built out with pharmacy and with our departments in arts and sciences that focus on that kind of research. So the impact for sure is we have an ongoing research project related to COVID and the examination of variants that is funded by the state. That was not possible without the decision. So I guess my decision is worth about $8 million right now. Long term, I'm not sure how impactful it would be. Our committee and task force, led by an outstanding professor in biology, is going to give me some written recommendations to advance even further, because faculty governance is important to me. I wouldn't want to override what they say, but right now I got an $8 million effect. I don't know what it will be long term. My assumption is it will be robust because I can't imagine the state turning to anyone else. At bare minimum, we'll continue to be able to talk to our legislative group and the governor about funding this because there's a need. So I feel comfortable if that decision was going to be impactful for our long-term dollars. And those schools are now able to attract, of course, better undergrads and grad students, et cetera, because they're interested in this kind of research. But I do want to add another example, because you're asking me about faculty, and especially retention of faculty. We have something called a Carolina Chair. It must be equivalent to your Boyd Chair. It's our top chair, is the Carolina Chair. And to get a Carolina Chair, generally you're in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, or you're a fellow, you're at the highest level of the game. And what I created with our strategic planning money is going to be called an eminent chair. It's one, I'm not saying it's below the Carolina Chair, but it's for people who are really on the ascend and they're attain fellowship status. They have a chance perhaps to make the academies. We don't know, but we want to invest and keep them, because what we suffer from in South Carolina is that once you get a certain level of NIH funding or NSF funding, those very talented people are attracted. Other institutions want to come get them. And it doesn't matter their race or background. Once you hit a certain level with NIH funding, you are now portable in the minds of other provosts, people like me. And so starting in the fall, we have allocated money so that those top investigators and researchers who may not have academy level status are going to be eligible for that funding. And those will be 5 years. They get to keep the name for as long as they want to, because names matter. And they will be like an eminent university professor of X. And they will receive funding and additional funding. And I think that's also going to help us retain our faculty, which deals with your research question, because if people walk with their grants, it's open. You just lost that. Every bit of investment you've made in them, especially if they started with you in rank as assistant professors, you have lost, and you have transported all that economic value to another provost. I'm also using them to recruit faculty members. And I won't name any names, but I'll come here and get your people too. And we're going to go and get the very best people we can and put them in those professorships as well, enhancing our research portfolio and making sure that they are taken care of if they're not being taken care of at the institutions where they are. And that's what I will be aggressively pursuing if I were here, because if we put money together to retain, we also can put that money together to go out and get those people and add to our portfolio. And those things are the things that I'm most comfortable with. So the $8 million I brought in, Indirects aren't that great for that because it's government money, but if we get the government money on indirects, that 53% that we get, we kick it back and we're gonna go out and get great people.
Well,
Thank you.
I want to thank you again for the time and your very thoughtful answers.
Thank you all for the questions. And thank you for engaging in a discussion. I'm glad people pushed back on me. Nobody's been pushing back. I mean, you're just taking what I'm saying is, some kind of truth. I mean, bottom line, push back and have a conversation, because in the end, you're going to be, whoever you pick, you're going to be stuck with the person. You want to know that they're able to go back and forth with you in a really engaged way. And so that's who I am. That's what I really look forward to doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very